Echoes of Solitude. The Boston Symphony Hall emptied slowly, the applause still reverberating in Nathaniel Pierce's mind as he methodically packed his conductor's baton. At 42, he had achieved everything he'd ever wanted professionally, leading one of the country's most prestigious orchestras, earning critical acclaim, and bringing classical masterpieces to life with interpretations that made even the most jaded critics weep. Yet as the last audience member departed and the musicians dispersed, Nathaniel remained alone on the stage, surrounded by empty chairs and silent instruments. "Mr. Pierce?" The voice startled him. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Nathaniel turned to find a woman standing at the edge of the stage, her dark hair swept back in a simple knot, a cello case resting beside her. Her posture spoke of confidence, but her eyes, a striking shade of amber, held a wariness he recognized all too well. "The hall is technically closed," he said, more curtly than intended. "Auditions aren't until next month," she smiled, undeterred. "I'm Eleanor Winters, your new principal cellist. The board approved my transfer last week." Nathaniel frowned, scanning his memory. The previous cellist, Thomas, had announced his retirement, but Nathaniel hadn't expected a replacement so soon, and certainly not without his input. "I wasn't informed," he said, studying her more carefully. She appeared to be in her mid-30s with slender fingers that bore the calluses of a dedicated string player. "The board mentioned you might be surprised," Eleanor replied, stepping forward and extending her hand. "I come with recommendations from the Vienna Philharmonic." Something about her direct gaze disarmed him. Nathaniel shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip. "Vienna, you say? Under Hollander?" 3 years. Before that, Paris, an impressive resume if true. Nathaniel gestured toward her case. "Perhaps a demonstration? If you don't mind." Eleanor's eyes lit up. Without hesitation, she unpacked her cello, a magnificent instrument with a rich amber finish that matched her eyes. She positioned herself on the nearest chair, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening notes of Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 filled the empty hall, but Eleanor didn't play it as Nathaniel had heard countless times before. Her interpretation was both technically flawless and hauntingly personal, as if Bach had written it specifically for her hands. Nathaniel found himself closing his eyes, allowing the music to wash over him. When she finished, the silence felt heavier than before. "Well?" Eleanor asked, her voice betraying a hint of vulnerability beneath her professional demeanor. Nathaniel cleared his throat. "The board chose well," he admitted. "Welcome to Boston." Later that night, in his sparsely furnished apartment overlooking the Charles River, Nathaniel found himself thinking about Eleanor Winters. It wasn't just her exceptional playing that lingered in his mind, but the peculiar way she watched his face when he spoke, as if cataloging every expression. In 15 years of conducting, he had worked with hundreds of musicians, yet few had looked at him with such focused attention. Crescendo of connection. Over the next 3 months, Eleanor proved herself not just competent but exceptional. The orchestra responded to her presence like a body receiving a vital organ it hadn't known it was missing. During rehearsals, Nathaniel found his gaze repeatedly drawn to her. The way she swayed with the music, her eyes half closed in concentration, the slight furrow in her brow when tackling particularly complex passages. "You're staring again," remarked Jeffrey, the concertmaster, during a water break. "The entire wind section has noticed." Nathaniel straightened his score sheets. "I'm observing her technique. It's unusual." Jeffrey smirked. "That's why you've been turning down dinner with the board trustees for the first time in 5 years? To observe techniques?" Nathaniel ignored the comment, but truth be told, something had shifted. After rehearsals, he and Eleanor had fallen into a habit of discussing interpretations over coffee in the small cafe across from Symphony Hall. Their conversations ranged from Dvorak to Debussy, from childhood memories of first concerts to philosophical debates about modern compositions. "Music speaks what cannot be expressed," Eleanor said one evening, steam from her tea curling between them. "It tells what words never could." Mendelssohn. Nathaniel identified the quote. "You know your composers beyond their scores," she smiled, stirring a spoonful of honey into her tea with careful precision. "Most conductors I've worked with forget there were humans behind the notes. Most cellists I've worked with forget there's a human holding the baton," he countered, and her laughter, musical in itself, warmed something long dormant within him. It was Eleanor who suggested they attend an outdoor jazz performance in the park. Eleanor who convinced him to try the Ethiopian restaurant where they ate with their hands. Eleanor who slowly but surely drew him out of the fortress of solitude he'd built around himself. "Why have you never married?" she asked one night as they walked along the river. The city lights reflecting on the water. The directness of her question startled him. "Music has been my wife," he answered automatically, the response he'd given interviewers for years. Eleanor stopped walking. "That's what you tell journalists." "I'm asking what you tell yourself." Nathaniel looked away, watching a boat glide beneath the bridge. "I tried once in my 20s. She said living with me was like living with a ghost who only materialized to criticize her musical taste. Was she wrong? No, he admitted. I was obsessed, unyielding. The orchestra was my entire world. And now?" Eleanor's amber eyes searched his face. "Now I'm older, perhaps wiser, less certain that perfection exists." He hesitated. "Why do you ask?" Eleanor took his hand, her fingers cool against his palm. "Because I'd like to kiss you, Nathaniel Pierce. But I don't kiss ghosts." The first press of her lips against his was tentative, questioning. The second was not. Later, he would remember this as the moment music found its equal in his heart. Their relationship progressed with the measured pace of a well-conducted adagio. Nathaniel discovered Eleanor's fascination with astronomy, her collection of vintage record players, her habit of reading poetry before sleep. He revealed his childhood in rural Vermont, his struggles with anxiety before performances, his secret passion for baking sourdough bread. As summer turned to fall, they began appearing together at symphony functions. The board members exchanged knowing glances. The musicians made discreet bets on when he would propose. Even Jeffrey seemed pleased, commenting that Nathaniel had begun conducting with more emotion than mathematics. When Nathaniel finally did propose, on the empty stage after hours, where they had first met, Eleanor's yes came with tears that puzzled him slightly. There was joy in them, certainly, but something else too, something that resembled relief or perhaps fear conquered. "You're sure?" he asked, holding her close. "I've never been more certain of anything," she whispered against his shoulder. "I just never thought I'd find someone who would truly hear me." An odd choice of words, he thought fleetingly, but dismissed it as poetic sentiment as she kissed him again. Dissonant revelations winter descended upon Boston with a vengeance, blanketing the city in snow and transforming Symphony Hall into a refuge of warmth and music. With the announcement of their engagement, Nathaniel and Eleanor became the orchestra's favorite topic of conversation. The austere conductor and the enigmatic cellist. A romance born of Bach and Beethoven. "Mother is ecstatic to finally meet you," Nathaniel said one evening as they reviewed wedding plans in his apartment. "She's already calling you her musical daughter-in-law." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "About the visit to Vermont next weekend. I might need to reschedule. There's a specialist appointment I've been waiting months for." "A specialist?" Concern creased Nathaniel's brow. "Are you ill?" "No, nothing like that." Eleanor busied herself with reorganizing their wedding folder. "Just a routine checkup I can't miss." It wasn't the first evasion. Over the past weeks, Nathaniel had noticed a pattern of small inconsistencies. Eleanor's reluctance to answer her phone in his presence, her vague explanations about certain appointments, the way she sometimes seemed not to hear him when her back was turned. "Eleanor," he said, gently taking the folder from her hands. "What's going on?" "You've been distant." "I've just been preoccupied with wedding details," she replied, not quite meeting his gaze. "And the Mahler Symphony is demanding." Later that night, as Eleanor slept beside him, her phone lit up with a text message. Nathaniel wouldn't have noticed except for the unusual vibration pattern. 3 short pulses followed by 2 long ones. Without thinking, he glanced at the screen. Dr. Harlow confirmed for Tuesday. Bring audiogram results. Valerie audiogram? Nathaniel frowned, the word unfamiliar. Before he could ponder it further, Eleanor stirred and reached for the phone, quickly silencing it without reading the message. The following days brought more puzzling moments. During a dinner with the board of directors, the chairman's wife asked Eleanor a question about her previous orchestra, but Eleanor stared blankly until the question was repeated. At rehearsal, Nathaniel noticed she watched his baton with unusual intensity, sometimes seeming to follow other musicians, cues rather than leading as principal cellist should. Most peculiar was the evening he arrived early at her apartment and found her watching a television program with no sound, her eyes fixed on the moving lips of the actors. When she noticed him, she hurriedly turned it off. Just mindless entertainment, she explained, kissing him hello. The incident that finally crystallized his concerns occurred during their engagement party. The event, hosted by Jeffrey in his expansive Beacon Hill townhouse, gathered the orchestra's senior members and close friends. Amid the celebration, someone suggested that Eleanor play something on Jeffrey's antique cello. She declined politely, citing the champagne she'd consumed, but the requests persisted. Finally, with apparent reluctance, she took up the instrument. As she positioned her fingers, Jeffrey's teenage son accidentally dropped a serving tray behind her with a tremendous crash. Everyone jumped, except Eleanor, who remained perfectly still, unaware of the commotion until she turned and saw the reactions. The drive home that night was silent. Nathaniel's mind raced with possibilities, none of which explained all the peculiarities he'd observed. As they approached Eleanor's apartment, he could no longer contain his questions. "Who is Dr. Harlow?" he asked quietly. Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap. "You read my messages?" "It was accidental. The vibration pattern woke me." He pulled into a parking space but didn't turn off the engine. "Eleanor, if something's wrong, if you're ill or in trouble, you can tell me." She stared straight ahead, snowflakes gathering on the windshield. "I'm not ill." "Not exactly. Then what?" "Because something isn't adding up." His voice rose slightly. "The appointments, the way you sometimes don't respond, that text about audiograms." "I was going to tell you," she interrupted, her voice barely audible. "After the wedding. I had it all planned." "Tell me what?" Nathaniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. Eleanor turned to face him fully, her amber eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm not who you think I am, Nathaniel. Or rather, I am, but there's something you don't know." She took a deep breath, something that might change everything. The snow fell heavier now, isolating their car in a cocoon of white. In the silence, Nathaniel could hear his own heartbeat, too loud and too fast, like a metronome set at an impossible tempo. "Whatever it is," he said finally, "we'll face it together." But as Eleanor reached for his hand, her expression told him that she didn't believe him, that whatever secret she harbored had made her doubt the very foundation of their love. "Not tonight," she whispered. "Please. On our wedding night, I promise I'll tell you everything." Harmony interrupted. The December wedding was intimate. 60 guests in a historic stone chapel adorned with winter roses and candlelight. Despite the growing tension between them, Nathaniel and Eleanor had proceeded with their plans, a silent agreement to maintain the facade until they were truly alone. As Eleanor walked down the aisle in a simple ivory gown, Nathaniel felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed his anxiety. Whatever secret she carried, could it truly be worse than the scenarios his imagination had conjured? Cancer, perhaps. A previous marriage. A child given up for adoption. He had mentally prepared himself for each possibility, determined that none would change his feelings. "You look beautiful," he whispered as she joined him at the altar. "Thank you for waiting," she replied, a response that seemed to carry multiple meanings. The ceremony passed in a blur. Nathaniel recalled exchanging vows, the cool slide of the ring onto his finger, the kiss that sealed their union. The reception followed at an elegant boathouse overlooking the frozen river, where the orchestra members performed a piece specially composed for the occasion. Throughout the evening, Nathaniel caught Eleanor watching him with a mixture of love and apprehension. Each time their eyes met, her smile wavered slightly as if she were memorizing his face before an inevitable goodbye. Finally, as midnight approached, they departed amid a shower of silver confetti. The hotel suite awaiting them featured panoramic views of the snow-covered city, a bottle of champagne chilling by the fireplace, and an atmosphere of expectant intimacy. Eleanor moved to the window, her silhouette outlined against the glittering skyline. She had changed into a silk nightgown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, but her posture remained tense. "We don't have to do this tonight," Nathaniel offered, misinterpreting her hesitation. "If you're tired, it's not that." Eleanor turned to face him. "It's time for the truth, Nathaniel. All of it." He sat on the edge of the bed, heart hammering. "I'm listening." Eleanor took a deep breath. When I was 3 years old, I contracted bacterial meningitis. I survived, but not without consequences. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached up to her ear, removing what Nathaniel had always assumed was a discreet earring. "This is a hearing aid," she said, holding it in her palm. "One of the most advanced available. I have one in each ear." Nathaniel stared at the small device, struggling to comprehend. "You're hard of hearing?" "I'm profoundly deaf, Nathaniel," Eleanor's voice caught. "Without these, I hear almost nothing, just the faintest perception of very loud sounds, more vibration than actual hearing." "But," the orchestra. "You're playing." "Our conversations. I've had intensive speech therapy since childhood. I read lips exceptionally well. The hearing aids help me detect sound patterns, and years of training have taught me to feel music through vibrations." She paused, watching his reaction. "I wasn't born deaf, so I remember what music sounds like. That memory guides my playing." Nathaniel stood, pacing the room as he processed this revelation. "All those times you didn't respond when your back was turned. I couldn't see your lips. The strange text message pattern. Special vibrations for different contacts. Visual alerts aren't always enough. The television without sound. Practice for lip reading in different accents." Nathaniel stopped pacing. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Did you think I wouldn't understand?" Eleanor's composure finally broke, tears streaming down her face. "Your entire life is dedicated to sound, to music in its most perfect form. You once dismissed a violinist for being a quarter tone off in a single passage." She wiped her cheeks. "And there's more. My audiologist, Dr. Harlow, confirmed what I've suspected for months. My residual hearing is deteriorating. Eventually, even with the most advanced technology, I won't hear anything at all." The silence that followed seemed to stretch indefinitely. Eleanor removed her second hearing aid and placed both on the nightstand. "Now I can't hear my own voice," she said, her speech slightly altered without the audio feedback. "This is the real me, Nathaniel. A musician who can't hear music. A wife who won't hear her husband's voice. If you want to annul the marriage, I'll understand." Nathaniel stared at her. This woman he thought he knew completely, now revealed as someone even more extraordinary than he had realized. All the small mysteries that had puzzled him suddenly aligned into a picture of remarkable courage and determination. He moved toward her slowly, ensuring she could see his face clearly. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the hearing aids. Eleanor nodded, confusion evident in her expression. Nathaniel picked up the devices, examining their intricate design. Then deliberately he set them aside and took both her hands in his. "I need you to read my lips very carefully," he said, enunciating each word, "because I'm only going to say this once." Eleanor's eyes, those beautiful amber eyes that had captivated him from the beginning, fixed on his mouth with the focus of someone whose life depended on not missing a single syllable. "I married you today," Nathaniel said, "not your ears." The silent symphony spring arrived in Boston with a riot of cherry blossoms and renewed energy. 4 months into their marriage, Nathaniel and Eleanor Pierce had established a new rhythm, one that accommodated challenges but centered on profound connection. Their apartment now featured visual doorbells, specialized alarm clocks, and captioned video calls. Nathaniel had installed mirrors at strategic corners to help Eleanor see approaches from behind. More importantly, he had immersed himself in American Sign Language, with the same dedication he once applied to mastering Mahler's complexities. "Your fingerspelling is improving," Eleanor signed one morning over breakfast, the sunlight catching the simple gold band on her hand. "But my grammar is still atrocious," Nathaniel replied, both speaking and signing, a practice he maintained to strengthen his skills. Eleanor laughed, the sound as musical as ever. "You conduct an orchestra. Your hands were made for this language." The orchestra had adjusted remarkably well to the revelation of Eleanor's deafness. After initial surprise, they had embraced the changes Nathaniel implemented: visual cues, subtle lighting adjustments, and a reorganized seating arrangement that allowed Eleanor better sight lines. Several musicians had even joined them for weekly ASL classes. Not everyone had been supportive. 2 board members had suggested, with carefully constructed concern, that a deaf principal, cellist, might compromise the orchestra's standard of excellence. Nathaniel's response had been uncharacteristically blunt. They could either embrace the situation or accept his resignation. The matter wasn't raised again. Today marked a special occasion. After months of secretive work, Nathaniel was premiering an original composition, his first in nearly a decade. The piece, titled The Silent Symphony, had been created specifically for Eleanor. "Are you nervous?" she asked as they prepared to leave for Symphony Hall. "Terrified," he admitted. "This is different from anything I've ever composed." Different can be extraordinary. She straightened his tie with practiced fingers. "Like us." The hall was filled beyond capacity, the regular audience supplemented by members of the deaf community, invited personally by Nathaniel. The stage had been modified with special resonating platforms that would transmit vibrations more effectively throughout the floor. As Nathaniel took his position at the podium, he looked at Eleanor, seated in her usual place but without her cello for this performance. Instead, she wore a specially designed vest with embedded sensors that would translate certain sound frequencies into tactile sensations against her skin. He raised his baton, made eye contact with each section, and began. The composition opened with a conventional movement, strings and woodwinds creating delicate melodies that represented Nathaniel's life before Eleanor. The second movement introduced subtle dissonance, the uncertainty of falling in love. The third built to what seemed like a traditional climax, then abruptly shifted into something unprecedented. For this final movement, Nathaniel had consulted acoustics experts and deaf musicians to create music that could be experienced through multiple senses. Lower frequencies dominated, felt as much as heard. Percussion created vibrations that traveled through the special flooring. Visual elements came into play, lighting that pulsed with the rhythm, dancers whose movements interpreted the sound. The audience watched in amazement as Eleanor closed her eyes, a smile spreading across her face as she experienced the music through her body, rather than her ears. When the piece concluded, there was a moment of stunned silence before the hall erupted, half the audience applauding conventionally, the other half waving raised hands in the air, the deaf community's expression of appreciation. Later that night, as they walked home along the river path, Eleanor stopped suddenly and turned to Nathaniel. "I need to tell you something important," she signed, her expression serious. Nathaniel's heart skipped. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." His hands froze mid-sign, shock rendering him momentarily speechless. "Are you certain?" he finally managed to ask. Eleanor nodded. 8 weeks, Dr. Harlow confirmed it yesterday. She hesitated. "The genetic counselor says there's a possibility the baby might inherit my hearing loss." Nathaniel considered this, then smiled slowly. "Then we'll have a child who experiences the world uniquely, just like their mother." His signing grew more confident. "And we'll love them unconditionally." "I was so afraid," Eleanor confessed, "that my deafness would be the end of us. That you'd see it as a flaw in the perfect composition you'd planned for your life." Nathaniel shook his head, taking her hands in his. "The most beautiful music contains unexpected variations, Eleanor. They're not flaws. They're what make each piece memorable." He gently placed his palm against her still flat stomach. "Our child will be another beautiful variation." Eleanor's eyes glistened with tears as she guided his hand to her heart. "Can you feel it?" she asked. "The rhythm?" Beneath his fingertips, Nathaniel felt the steady beat of her heart, a tempo as reliable and true as any metronome. In that moment, he understood what Eleanor had known all along, that the most profound music existed in the spaces between sounds, in the silent language of touch and trust and love. "Yes," he answered, both with his voice and his hands. "I can feel everything." As they continued their walk, the city lights reflected in the water beside them. Nathaniel thought about the symphony that had brought them together, and the silent one that now bound them for life. He had spent decades chasing perfect sound, only to discover that the most perfect harmony couldn't be heard at all, only felt, deep in the chambers of a heart finally open to love's endless variations. The future held uncertainties, challenges they would face together, raising a child in a world that sometimes feared difference, continuing to adapt as Eleanor's hearing changed, balancing their careers with parenthood. But tonight, under a canopy of stars, those concerns seemed distant and manageable. Tonight, there was only the silent symphony of two hearts beating as one, creating a music more beautiful than anything Nathaniel had ever conducted.